Kawasaki won again. Not the championship everyone was watching, but in the places Kawasaki has always cared about. Production bike engineering, real-world sales, machines that quietly embarrass louder brands. You probably didn't notice. That's kind of the point. Between 2015 and 2020, a Northern Irish rider named Jonathan Rea climbed onto a Kawasaki Ninja ZX-10RR and won 6 consecutive World Superbike Championships. 6 in a row. The previous record was 4, and those weren't even consecutive. Rea racked up 104 race victories wearing Kawasaki green, broke every meaningful record the series had, and stepped away from full-time World Superbike competition in 2025 as the winningest rider in World Superbike history with 119 career wins across his time on both Honda and Kawasaki machinery. So why can most motorcycle fans name every MotoGP champion from the last decade, but draw a blank on the guy who dominated production racing for half of it? That question is the entire story of Kawasaki, a brand that keeps winning in the categories it competes in, keeps building machines that embarrass the spec sheets of its rivals, and keeps getting treated like the boring middle child of Japanese motorcycling. Today, we're going to look at the numbers, the racing results, the engineering, and the sales figures. And by the end, you're either going to agree that Kawasaki is the most underrated motorcycle brand on the planet, or you're going to be really angry in the comments. Either way, I win. Let's start with what Kawasaki means to most riders. If you walk into a motorcycle dealership in any major city, Kawasaki is the brand next to the door. It's the Ninja 400 that every new rider considers. It's the Z900 parked next to the more expensive European options. It's green, it's reliable, it's fine. Meanwhile, Ducati has the Borgo Panigale factory tour in Bologna, where you can practically smell the Italian leather. Harley-Davidson has the museum in Milwaukee and a million-member owner community called HOG. BMW Motorrad throws the GS Trophy Rally, where adventure riders compete across continents in matching gear. Kawasaki has a really fast motorcycle and a legacy of being overlooked. The thing is, when you actually look at the results, overlooked doesn't come close to describing how strange this gap is. This is a brand that has been building category-defining machines for over 50 years, and almost nobody outside of hardcore enthusiasts gives them proper credit for it. This is where the story actually begins. Not in a boardroom or a marketing meeting, but on a racetrack. The World Superbike Championships, spelled WSBK, is the premier racing series for production-based motorcycles. These are bikes derived from machines you can walk into a dealer and buy, not one-off prototypes with million-dollar budgets like MotoGP. Real motorcycles, raced at the absolute limit. And from 2015 to 2020, Kawasaki owned it. Jonathan Rea joined the Kawasaki racing team in 2015 after spending years at Honda without a title. In his very first season on the Ninja ZX-10RR, he won 14 of 26 races and clinched the championship at Jerez with 2 rounds still remaining. That was year 1. By 2018, Rea was at the Czech Grand Prix circuit in Brno, crossing the finish line for his 60th career World Superbike victory, breaking Carl Fogarty's all-time wins record that many thought would stand forever. He just kept going. Title number 3, then 4, then 5, then, at Estoril in October 2020, he sealed his 6th consecutive World Championship, a record that no rider in production-based motorcycle racing had ever come close to. When Rea finally stepped away from full-time racing at the end of 2025, his numbers looked like a video game glitch. 119 career wins, 104 of them on Kawasaki machinery. 6,382 championship points, more than 2,000 ahead of second place. Over 2,000 laps led across nearly 37,000 kilometers of racing. And here's the detail that still gets me. Including Scott Russell's title in 1993 and Tom Sykes winning in 2013, Kawasaki has secured 8 rider championships in the modern WSBK era, including 6 straight with Rea. That's not a hot streak, that's a dynasty. But here's what makes this frustrating. World Superbike races on the same circuits as MotoGP in many cases. The racing is close, the speeds are insane, and the bikes are actually closer to what real people ride. Jonathan Ria's Kawasaki Ninja ZX-10RR at Phillip Island or Assen was pulling lap times within seconds of MotoGP machinery. The difference is television deals and cultural positioning. MotoGP has the Dorna Sports marketing machine, the massive Spanish and Italian fan bases, and the historical prestige of being the premier class. World Superbike is the better value proposition for a manufacturer because the racing directly correlates with production sales, but it is the worst deal for fame. So Jonathan Ria ended up in a bizarre position where he was statistically one of the most dominant racers in the history of two-wheeled motorsport, and casual motorcycle fans had barely heard of him. If you asked someone on the street to name a motorcycle racer, they would say Valentino Rossi, maybe Marc Marquez. They would not say the rider who won 6 straight titles on a Kawasaki. Pay attention to this next detail because it explains everything about how Kawasaki thinks as a company. To understand why Kawasaki's racing success never translated into the kind of cultural presence that Ducati enjoys, you need to go back to the beginning. The beginning is a motorcycle that changed the entire industry. In 1972, Kawasaki released the Z1 900. It packed a 903 cubic centimeter, double overhead camshaft inline-4 engine that made 82 horsepower. It was one of the first big Japanese double overhead camshaft inline-4s, the bike that reset the Superbike benchmark overnight. Honda's legendary CB750 had been the king since 1969, and the Z1 walked in and dethroned it. At the Daytona International Speedway, a Kawasaki Z1 set the FIM 24-hour endurance record, averaging 109 miles per hour. The magazine Motorcycle News named it Machine of the Year 4 straight times from 1973 to 1976. Kawasaki sold roughly 85,000 Z1 units in the first 3 years, and the Society of Automotive Engineers of Japan eventually designated it one of the 240 landmarks of Japanese automotive technology. The Z1 proved that Kawasaki could build a machine that didn't just compete with the best in the world, but embarrassed it. 12 years later, they did it again. The 1984 Kawasaki GPZ 900R was one of the first production motorcycles to combine a liquid-cooled 16-valve inline-4 with true 150 miles per hour performance, 908 cubic centimeters, 115 horsepower, and a top speed of 151 miles per hour. That made it the first production road motorcycle in history to break the 150 miles per hour barrier. In its debut year, the GPZ 900R finished first and second at the Isle of Man production TT. And then it stayed in production for 19 years, all the way until 2003 in Japan, outlasting multiple bikes that were supposed to replace it. Now here's the part that perfectly captures who Kawasaki is as a company. In 1986, Paramount Pictures needed a motorcycle for Tom Cruise to ride in Top Gun. They approached Kawasaki about using the GPZ 900R. Kawasaki reportedly refused to supply the bike for free and required that Kawasaki logos be removed from the on-screen motorcycle. One of the biggest movies of the decade wanted to give them free global advertising, and Kawasaki essentially said no thanks, buy the bike like everyone else. That is not a marketing department making decisions. That is an engineering company that happens to make motorcycles. And that distinction matters more than anything else in this story. And yet, despite that indifference to marketing, Kawasaki accidentally created the most iconic name in sport bike history, the word Ninja. Kawasaki Motors Corp. USA coined the name for the GPZ 900R's American launch, and it stuck so hard that within a few years, casual observers were calling every sport bike a ninja bike, regardless of who made it. That is the kind of brand penetration that marketing departments spend millions trying to achieve. Kawasaki did it by accident, and then never really capitalized on it the way a consumer company would have. What they did instead was keep building faster motorcycles. After the GPZ 900R, Kawasaki entered what the industry calls the Speed Wars. The 1990 ZR 1100 was the fastest production motorcycle in the world at 176 miles per hour. When Honda built the CBR 1100XX Blackbird to take the title, Kawasaki responded with the ZX-12R. Suzuki entered the fight with the Hayabusa. These machines were hitting speeds that genuinely scared regulators, and in 1999 the Japanese and European manufacturers signed a voluntary agreement to limit top speeds to 186 miles per hour. The Kawasaki ZX-14R, which came later, pushed right up against that limit and became the last great chapter of that arms race. The ZX14R is discontinued in most markets now, but it remains a cult favorite among straight-line speed addicts who value engineering over aesthetics. The point is that Kawasaki kept showing up to every performance fight for decades. Speed record, they were there. Displacement wars, they were there. Endurance racing, there. Production Superbike Championships, dominated. Because Kawasaki didn't stop pushing after the speed wars. In 2015, they launched a motorcycle that honestly still sounds like science fiction. The Kawasaki Ninja H2R is a 998 cubic centimeters supercharged inline 4, producing a claimed 326 horsepower with ram air at 14,000 RPM. Read that number again, 326 horsepower, from a production motorcycle. For reference, a BMW S1000RR was making around 200 horsepower when the H2R launched. The supercharger alone is worth an entire video. Kawasaki Heavy Industries did not outsource the design. They built it in-house, pulling engineers from the company's gas turbine and machinery division and its aerospace division. The same people who design components for jet engines and power plants designed this supercharger. The impeller spins at 9.2 times crank speed, which means at full tilt it is rotating at roughly 130,000 RPM and pumping 200 liters per second at up to 2.4 times atmospheric pressure. There is no intercooler. Instead, the system relies on evaporative fuel injection to cool the intake charge. It is a completely different engineering philosophy from anything else on two wheels, and the results speak for themselves. Five-time World Supersport champion Kenan Sofuoglu rode an H2R across the Osman Gazi Bridge in Turkey and hit a calculated speed of 400 kilometers per hour, roughly 249 miles per hour. Cycle World magazine tested the street-legal H2 variant and recorded a quarter mile in 9.62 seconds at 152 miles per hour, hitting 60 miles per hour from a standstill in 2.6 seconds. Another rider pushed a lightly modified H2 past 226 miles per hour at Mojave, and a Kawasaki team hit 209 miles per hour at the Bonneville Salt Flats. The 2026 Ninja H2R carries a sticker price of $59,100, and it remains one of the most powerful production motorcycles ever offered for sale. But this is the part that still doesn't make sense to me, and it might be the single most telling data point in this entire video. In 2025, multiple registration trackers reported Kawasaki moving to the top of the US motorcycle brand ranking. Through the first 9 months of the year, Kawasaki posted roughly 14% year-over-year growth in unit sales. During that same period, Honda's US numbers declined about 8%, and Harley-Davidson's domestic retail fell by nearly 20%. The brand that nobody talks about at the water cooler was outselling the brand that everyone talks about. Now, some context is important here. Globally, Kawasaki is still mid-pack. On total volume, Honda is in another universe, selling tens of millions of motorcycles worldwide compared to Kawasaki's hundreds of thousands. But Honda also moves millions of small displacement commuter bikes across Southeast Asia and India. In the developed market high-margin categories where enthusiast sport bikes, adventure tourers, and naked roadsters compete, Kawasaki is winning. And compared to the brands that get all the press, it's not even close by volume. Ducati delivered 54,495 motorcycles in 2024, down about 6% from the year before, generating just over €1 billion in revenue. Kawasaki sells roughly 9 times as many motorcycles as Ducati. Harley-Davidson moved approximately 151,200 units worldwide in 2024, down 7% on retail and 17% on shipments. Kawasaki also sells about 3 times as many globally. So the question becomes obvious. If Kawasaki is winning races, building the most advanced engines, and now outselling its supposedly more prestigious rivals in the biggest motorcycle market on Earth, why does Ducati get the magazine covers? Why does Harley get the documentary treatment? Why does BMW Motorrad get the adventure lifestyle dream? The answer is hiding in a corporate org chart in Kobe, Japan. Kawasaki Heavy Industries is a 5-division industrial conglomerate: aerospace systems, energy solution and marine engineering, precision machinery and robot, rolling stock, and finally power sports and engine, which is where motorcycles live alongside ATVs, jet skis, and side-by-sides. This is a company that builds Shinkansen bullet train cars for Japan's rail network. They manufacture fuselage sections for the Boeing 787 Dreamliner. They build liquefied natural gas carrier ships and naval submarines. They make the rolling stock for the New York City subway, specifically the R142A and R160B fleet cars. And they operate one of the largest installed bases of industrial robots in Japan, second only to Fanuc. Motorcycles are a fraction of the power sports and engine division. That division is actually one of Kawasaki's strongest profit centers, generating roughly $327 million in net profit on about $4 billion in sales during fiscal year 2023. But the parent company's primary customer relationships are governments, defense contractors, and massive industrial clients. Kawasaki Heavy Industries is a business-to-business engineering giant that happens to make consumer motorcycles on the side, and that corporate DNA shows up in everything. Walk into a Ducati dealership, and it feels like a Milanese fashion boutique. Walk into a Kawasaki dealer, and it feels like a well-organized hardware store. That's not an insult. It's just what happens when your marketing budget comes from a company that considers a submarine contract a bigger deal than a sport bike launch. If you're finding any of this interesting, hit subscribe. We go deep on motorcycle industry stories every week, and the next one is already in production. Now, in 2008, Kawasaki made a decision that sealed its cultural fate. The factory Kawasaki racing team withdrew from MotoGP after a difficult final season. From that moment forward, the premier class conversation in motorcycle racing belonged exclusively to Honda, Yamaha, Ducati, and eventually KTM and BMW. Kawasaki chose to invest in production-based racing, WSBK and National Superbike Championships, because those series race motorcycles that consumers actually buy, it's a rational engineering company decision. Racing in WSBK means the Ninja ZX-10R that wins on Sunday is closely related to the ZX-10R on the showroom floor. MotoGP prototypes share almost nothing with production bikes. From an engineering standpoint, WSBK makes more sense. From a marketing standpoint, it was invisible. MotoGP is where the cameras are. It's where Ducati won almost every Grand Prix in 2024, where Jorge Martin and Francesco Bagnaia fought for the title all season long. It's where millions of viewers around the world tune in every other weekend. Kawasaki chose the series that sells motorcycles over the series that sells stories. And that one decision explains more about the brand's cultural position than anything else. Now, I told you at the beginning that I would be honest about where Kawasaki's dominance has limits. If I only told you the good parts, this would be a fan video, not a documentary. The Ria era at World Superbike ended. Ria left Kawasaki after 2023, moved to Yamaha for a difficult 2024 season, and stepped away from full-time competition at the end of 2025. Meanwhile, Toprak Razgatlioglu, riding a BMW, won the 2024 and 2025 World Superbike titles convincingly. The 2025 final standings had Razgatlioglu first on 616 points, Ducati's Nicolo Bolega second on 603, and Ducati's Alvaro Bautista third. Kawasaki's rebranded factory effort, the Bimota by Kawasaki Racing Team, placed Alex Lowe's 6th and Axel Bassani 10th. Kawasaki is still in the mix, but this is a clear step back from the Ria Dynasty years. At the Isle of Man TT, Honda took the Solo Manufacturer Award in 2024. BMW machinery dominated the podiums in the big Superbike and Senior TT classes in both 2024 and 2025, with riders like Peter Hickman and Davey Todd. Michael Dunlop set the Superbike lap record at over 135 miles per hour in 2024, and he did it on a Honda. Kawasaki is still competitive in the Supersport classes with the ZX-6R, but the headline trophies on the mountain course belong to other brands right now. In Moto America, the U.S. National Superbike Series, Cameron Beaubier won his 6th championship in 2025 on a Yamaha. Ducati's Josh Herrin took the rider's title in 2024. The ZX-10R remains a strong platform in support classes, but Kawasaki is not the dominant force in American Premier Class racing that it once was. These are legitimate weaknesses, and if you are a Kawasaki fan, you have to own them. The brand's defenders cannot just wave the Ria flag and pretend the last 3 years did not happen. World Superbike has moved on. The Isle of Man TT podiums have changed color. Moto America is someone else's championship right now. But something interesting happened while Kawasaki was supposedly falling behind on the racetrack. They started building the future. In September 2023, Kawasaki launched the Ninja E1 and ZE1 electric motorcycles. These were among the first electric production bikes from the Japanese Big Four manufacturers. Honda, Yamaha, and Suzuki had prototypes, concepts, and announcements. Kawasaki shipped actual products. The E1 models are small, A1 license-compliant bikes with 2 removable lithium-ion batteries, about 72 kilometers of range, and a peak output of 9 kilowatts. They are not replacing the Ninja ZX-10R. They are establishing a beachhead. At roughly $7,500 for the Ninja E1 in the United States, they are aimed at urban commuters and new riders, and they give Kawasaki a production platform to iterate on while everyone else is still showing off concepts at motorcycle shows. Kawasaki also demonstrated a hybrid Ninja 7 platform with a combination of electric motor and internal combustion engine. And they have shown a hydrogen combustion prototype derived from the H2 architecture, which would burn hydrogen fuel rather than gasoline, while keeping the character of a traditional engine. Honda has publicly committed to 30 electric motorcycle models by 2030, so Kawasaki is not alone in this race. But they got to market first with actual production units, and that matters. The market advantage is real, and alongside the future bikes, there is the KLR 650. This might be the most Kawasaki motorcycle of all. The KLR is a liquid-cooled, single-cylinder dual sport that has been in production off and on since 1987. It has a cult following among long-distance travelers, backcountry riders, and adventure tourists who prioritize reliability over prestige. The United States Marine Corps even used a modified diesel version of the KLR platform, the HDT M1030 M1, for tactical operations. A military using your bike for actual combat operations is a level of product validation that no amount of Instagram advertising can match. The KLR was relaunched in 2022, and it remains one of the most practical adventure motorcycles you can buy. Now, let us talk about the marketing comparison directly, because this is where the gap between perception and reality gets absurd. In 2024, Ducati machinery dominated MotoGP, winning almost every Grand Prix that season. Jorge Martin won the rider's title on a Pramac Ducati after a season-long fight with Francesco Bagnaia, who had won the 2 previous championships. Ducati swept the manufacturer's championship. This is elite racing at the highest level, and Ducati absolutely earned that dominance. MotoGP coverage generates an enormous amount of free media for Ducati. Every race weekend, hundreds of journalists write about Ducati machinery, interview Ducati riders, and photograph Ducati motorcycles. That media exposure is worth more than any advertising campaign. Ducati operates a factory museum in Borgo Panigale that attracts motorcycle enthusiasts from around the world. They won the Red Dot Design Award Best of the Best in 2024 for the Diavel V4. Their lifestyle business, including branded apparel and accessories, is a structural part of the company, not a side project. Ducati sells roughly 54,000 motorcycles a year and generates 1 billion euros in revenue doing it. That's an average of about 18,000 euros per motorcycle sold, which tells you these are premium, high-margin machines with a lifestyle price tag. Harley-Davidson's playbook is entirely different but equally effective at building cultural identity. The Harley Owners Group, known as HOG, has roughly 1 million members worldwide. Harley owns the museum in Milwaukee, operates branded events and rallies, and has spent 122 years cultivating the idea that a Harley-Davidson is not a motorcycle, but a lifestyle. Even as their sales declined 17% on shipments in 2024, Harley held 74.5% of the US touring motorcycle market. Their customer is loyal to the point of religious devotion. BMW Motorrad set an all-time sales record of approximately 210,000 motorcycles in 2024, driven by the GS Adventure platform. They throw the GS Trophy, a global adventure rally where owner-riders compete across multiple continents. They offer factory tours in Berlin's Spandau. The R1300 GS has become the default aspirational adventure motorcycle in most of the developed world. Kawasaki does none of this at meaningful scale. No factory museum open to the public, no million-member owner community, no global adventure rally, no MotoGP coverage generating free press every 2 weeks. Their closest thing to a lifestyle product is the Z900 RS Cafe Racer, which is genuinely excellent and has been a top seller in its class in Japan. But one retro naked bike does not make a lifestyle brand. So what do we actually make of all this? Here is where I think the real insight lives, and it goes beyond Kawasaki into how we evaluate any brand in any industry. Kawasaki does not win everything, nobody does. They lost World Superbike to BMW. They do not race MotoGP. They got outrun at the Isle of Man TT. These are real gaps, and they deserve acknowledgement. But Kawasaki wins where it chooses to compete, and it competes where it can directly connect racing performance to production motorcycles. The Ninja ZX-10RR that Ria won 6 titles on is a direct relative of the bike you can buy at a Kawasaki dealer. The H2R's supercharger was designed by the same engineers who build gas turbines for power plants. The Ninja E1 and ZE1, launched in September 2023, made Kawasaki one of the first of the Japanese Big Four to bring electric motorcycles to market. They have hybrid and hydrogen combustion prototypes already in testing. And the Power Sports division? It is one of the most profitable arms of a conglomerate that builds infrastructure for entire nations. This is not a company surviving on passion and brand loyalty the way some boutique manufacturers are. This is an engineering machine backed by bullet train money and submarine contracts, and the fact that it also makes a 326 horsepower motorcycle for $59,000 is honestly kind of hilarious when you think about it. There is a deeper lesson buried in all of this about how we decide which brands deserve respect. We reward story over substance. We reward visibility over victory. Ducati wins MotoGP and gets magazine covers because MotoGP is the sport the motorcycle media chose to elevate. Kawasaki wins WSBK and gets a paragraph on page 47 because WSBK was the sport the media chose to ignore. Harley-Davidson sales have been in free fall for years, down 17% on shipments in 2024 alone, but the brand still commands an almost mythological status in American culture. Meanwhile, Kawasaki quietly became the top-selling motorcycle brand in the United States, and the story barely made the enthusiast press, let alone mainstream news. This is not a complaint. It is an observation about how the motorcycle industry works, and honestly, how most industries work. The companies that tell the best stories get the most attention, regardless of whether their products are actually the best. Kawasaki does not tell stories. Kawasaki builds motorcycles that tell their own stories through spec sheets, lap times, and sales receipts. The Z1 did not need a marketing campaign. It needed a dynamometer and a stopwatch. The GP-Z900R did not need a product placement deal. It needed a runway long enough to hit 151 miles per hour. The H2R does not need an influencer partnership. It needed a bridge in Turkey and a rider crazy enough to point it at 400 kilometers per hour. The motorcycle industry loves a good narrative. The Italian passion of Ducati, the American freedom of Harley, the German precision of BMW, the everything to everyone ambition of Honda. Every major brand has a story that transcends the product. Kawasaki's story is that it does not have one, or rather, its story is the absence of a story because the company that owns it is too busy building trains and airplanes and robots to sit down and craft one. Kawasaki's brand identity is the machines themselves, the Z1 that dethroned Honda in 1972, the GP-Z900R that broke 150 miles per hour in 1984 and told Paramount to buy its own bike, the Ninja name that became synonymous with sport bikes worldwide, the H2R that borrowed jet engine technology to build one of the fastest production motorcycles in history, the ZX-10RR that gave Jonathan Rea 6 titles, and the quiet, stubborn climb to #1 in US sales while everyone was busy writing articles about Ducati's latest color scheme. Kawasaki won again, and next year they'll probably win again somewhere nobody is watching. Whether anybody notices is kind of beside the point. That is exactly how an engineering company operates. You build the best thing you can, put it on the showroom floor, and let the results speak. The results are speaking loudly. YouTube thinks you should watch this video next, and honestly, I agree with the algorithm on this one. Click it. And if you stuck around for this entire ride, Subscribe. We're just getting started.